And it's BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Thursday. It is time for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. True Crime Talk Radio is a segment that I do here on Black Box Online Radio, where I can talk about multiple subjects within a single episode. And because today is Thursday, everybody can say hello to the Fox here. And in this episode, I will be discussing the Texarkana Moonlight Murders from 1946, as well as some other subjects that will be included later on, particularly the case of Stephen McDaniel. And firstly, I have to give a shout out to YouTube user Ghost Writer, who requested this one as one of the topics. So if you have any ideas for future episodes of Black Box Online Radio, True Crime Talk Radio in the morning comes to you every Tuesday and Thursday for the summer and fall now, and I will try my best to respond to the requested topics. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. Over the years, I've talked about the Phantom Killer from time to time. However, I fully admit that I am not an expert on this story. It's not a case that I know inside and out, but I'm going to try my best to do a basic rundown of the information for you before we get into the suspect list. And firstly, we have Jerome here from the French Wrecking Crew. Jerome, how's it going? We have Casbah here who says good morning. Good morning to you too, Casbah. And we also have Scott in the chat. Good morning to you, Scott. Now, with the Phantom Killer, the first crime occurred on February 22nd of 1946, and this was the attack on Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean LeRae. This attack was very different than a lot of other serial killer activities because both of the victims survived. And you might read some things online or maybe even in certain books about how Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean LeRae were out on a date, and then they were attacked at a lover's lane. That's about halfway true. Were they out on a date? Yes. It was actually a double date, and then they parted ways from the other couple. But as I understand from reading James Presley's book, they're actually just driving down the road, and then they decided to stop because Jimmy Hollis wanted to look at the stars. He thought it was a really nice evening, and that's why their car was parked on the side of the road. Then another vehicle came along, and somebody exited the vehicle wearing a sack over his head, a sack with holes cut out for the eyes, and this person ordered them out of the car. At first, Jimmy Hollis thought that this was just a prank or something, and he says, "Hey, you got the wrong people," but it turned out that it was not a prank. They were ordered out of the car, and for some reason, this hooded individual told Jimmy Hollis to drop his pants. This could have been done as an act of humiliation, and it could also have been done as a way to keep him from running, to immobilize him. And Mary Jean LeRae is watching this, so she turns away in disgust, and she actually thinks that Jimmy Hollis is shot, but he was not. Again, this is very bizarre for this type of serial killer. Jimmy Hollis was not shot, but the sound that she heard was actually the Phantom Killer striking Jimmy Hollis in the skull with the gun, and he would ultimately leave with a fractured skull, but he would survive the events. Then the Phantom Killer would turn his attention to Mary Jean LeRae, and she would also be attacked. And I'm going to be very careful with my language for YouTube. She was the victim of S.A. S.A. and the Phantom Killer actually inserted the firearm into her. This is quite different than some of the other serial killer stories that I've talked about here on Black Box Online Radio, such as the Zodiac Killer, such as Jack the Ripper, because this is a serial killer that actually committed S.A. That was on February 22nd of 1946. Now we're going to jump ahead over a month. February is a short month, mind you, but jumping ahead over a month to March 24th of 1946. And this is when we have the first murders that are attributed to the Phantom Killer. And these are going to be the murders of Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore. And this is when the Phantom Killer is committing a double homicide, but both of the victims did not survive. Therefore, they were not able to provide any witness statements about who attacked them. Was he wearing the hooded costume again? Was it the same person? Did he match the physical description? Was there any specific pieces of information that they were able to reveal about the killer? And William Kane is here, and he says S.A., I'll say it once, sexual assault. Trying to avoid that for YouTube. Ray Grant is here. He says, "Hi, Ned. I'm just pulling onto the Pittsburgh Parkway, so I won't be able to post for about 25 minutes. Don't forget that the Phantom struck on weekends like the Zodiac Killer." Hey, Ray Grant, thank you so much for that. And Ray, I've been following along with your videos on the Crackpot Files. And for all you guys who just want more and more Zodiac Killer content, you can go over to Ray Grant's channel, and he has a new series of videos coming out over there. And Ray, once you can get in the chat, please do so. We have a lot to talk about with the Phantom Killer. DNA King is here. He says howdy. But Richard Griffin and Polly Moore weren't able to provide witness descriptions of the killer. However, they were murdered with a 38. And this is something that I think is also very bizarre about the Phantom Killer mystery. If we look at the attack on Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean LeRae with 2 survivors, they are the only ones who are going to provide this witness description of the iconic Phantom Killer wearing this sack mask over his face. And this will be important because they give very conflicting statements to the authorities. Number one, when questioned, one of them thought that the killer was a light-skinned African-American male, and the other one thought that the killer was a darker-skinned Caucasian, a light-skinned black guy, and a dark-skinned white guy. And then the authorities ultimately decided that they thought Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean LeRae were liars. They thought that both of them knew the identity of the killer and they were covering up for this person. And I wish that I had been in the room when those conversations were taking place, because I have a hunch, I have a hypothesis, and this isn't the most scholarly effort on my part, but this is something that I have been thinking about. And that is that one of the videos that I watched was from a channel called Ogden Castle, and they talked about how there was this theory that was formulated by the police about, is it possible that the Phantom Killer was involved with some type of love triangle with Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean LeRae? And that's not something that Jimmy Hollis or Mary Jean LeRae appeared to have offered the police. That's something that it's possible where the authorities just kind of concocted that in their own minds. Maybe they thought the guy with a sack bag over his face, a precursor to Jason Voorhees, if you will, was not a very plausible story. So they just didn't believe in them, and they had to insert a type of perverted angle onto the case. I don't know why people do this. It's not only police officers, it can be theorists, true crime YouTubers, podcasters. Not me, of course, but everybody else. No, I'm joking. But some people who are members of law enforcement insert these types of perverted theories into true crime cases. I remember back when I was watching America's Most Wanted as a kid, and I must have been like 9 or 10 years old, and this woman went to the police and she's like all beaten up. I mean, perhaps she called them and they came to her house. That would make more sense. But she's beaten up and she has cuts all over her face, and she's like, I was attacked by a man. I was attacked by my ex-boyfriend. And the cops just didn't believe her. They thought that she had rough sex with her boyfriend and that she was lying and putting on an act and trying to get him into trouble. And again, I'm like 10 years old watching this on the television on a Saturday night, and I'm just thinking, what a load of crap. You call the police and you tell them that you got beaten up, and they're just like, no, we don't believe you. We think it's rough sex. I'm like, my parents did not prepare me for this world. Another example of this would be the Amanda Knox case, where the people who were investigating that, the officers and the journalists, mind you, again, it's not only law enforcement, they just had to insert these types of perverted ideas into the case. And even to the point where the investigators are going through the murder victim, in that case, named Meredith Kircher. They're going through Meredith Kircher's medicine cabinet, and they're looking at the thing that she owned, and the officers ask Amanda Knox, did your roommate enjoy anal sex? Stuff like that. So is it possible that there was this type of love triangle angle that was inserted into the Phantom Killer story because they didn't believe Mary Jean LeRae and Jimmy Hollis, and they just didn't accept the concept that there's this hooded individual that attacked them? And I don't think there's anything suspicious at all about somebody saying that they thought it was a light-skinned African-American male or a dark-skinned Caucasian. This guy had a sack mask over his face. What is the point of a mask? It hides your identity. All they can see is his skin tone from around the eyes. All right, so then, Richard Griffin and Polly Moore are murdered on March 24th of 1946. And, we don't have a lot of information. We don't have these stories from the victims, but they were murdered with a .32 caliber firearm. Then we go about 3 weeks into the future, into the month of April. And this will be the Phantom Killer's most famous crime, the murders of Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin. And the reason why is because there are a lot of clues that are left behind from this crime. Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin are both gunned down. They're killed also with a 32 caliber firearm, which the authorities believe was the same 32 that was used in the previous shooting of Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore. Evidence that there is a single killer and that this isn't just some type of hoax or media frenzy snowball theory where it's all put together. There is evidence of a single killer, and he's at least using the same firearm in 2 of the murders. And we have some people here in the chat. We have Mr. JSV who says, hello, friends. Hello, Mr. JSV. You got a cheers from the Fox on Thursday. And William Kane says, nice one, Ned. Surely even YouTube can't be that paranoid as to be afraid of words that you used. Yeah, I've heard a lot of other channels, like bigger channels than mine, just referring to it as SA as opposed to what it actually is. I'm just kind of taking their advice. But yes, it's kind of far out about what we have to censor. Conman87 is here. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to you too, Conman. All right, so the reason why the murders of Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin are so important in the chronology of the Phantom Killer are that a lot of evidence was left behind in this one. Betty Jo Booker was a saxophone player, and during the attack, the Phantom Killer or somebody took Betty Jo Booker's saxophone and threw it over a fence, and it wouldn't be discovered until 6 months later. Now, it's also possible that there was a heel print left behind of somebody who was watching this crime unfold. Maybe that was a witness. Maybe it's unrelated. We don't know, but that will be very important when we start looking at the suspects. Next, we have a 2-week gap from the murders of Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin to May 3rd of 1946, with the murders of Virgil Starks and Katie Starks. To be fair, Katie Starks survives. This is not a lover's lane shooting. This is not where a couple is parked in a car in a lover's lane type setting. There is a complete deviation from the pattern. Sound familiar? And you have a husband and wife that are sitting in the farmhouse. Virgil Starks is sitting in a chair about to listen to a radio program, and he is shot with a 22 caliber firearm. We don't know if it's a rifle or a pistol, but it's quite likely that it was a rifle because he was shot from somebody who was outside of the house. Then Virgil Starks passes away, and the Phantom Killer, or whomever committed the murders, went after Katie Starks, his wife, starts shooting her. She's shot multiple times, but this is important for the creation of the profiles. There are no witness sightings from the final murder. There are no witness sightings from the murder of Virgil Starks, and Katie Starks didn't get a good look at the perpetrator at all. She didn't see the man who was shooting at her. And in her defense, she's not supposed to. She's trying to run away. She's trying to survive. And she is trying to get as far away from this guy as she can. So she actually makes it to another house, and she is covered in blood because she's been shot. So somebody grabs a gun and fires a shot into the air to scare off any type of predator coming nearby. By predator, I mean the Phantom Killer. And apparently that worked. Do you guys hear what I'm saying? Did you hear that? February 22nd. Then there's a 4-week gap to the second crime, March 24th. Then there's a 3-week gap to the next crime, April 14th. Then there's a 2-week gap to the final crime, 4-3-2. And then the Phantom Killer just disappears into oblivion, just disappears into history, just disappears into some part of Texarkana. And yes, Texarkana is a border town. Part of it's in Arkansas, part of it's in Texas. You could think of it as 2 different towns, Texarkana, Arkansas, and Texarkana, Texas. Okay, though, what do we make of all this? How does all of this come together? You have different firearms that are used. In one incident where the killer's actually seen wearing his hooded costume mask, he is not even murdering the victims. So how does this relate to any of the suspects? Now, I told you guys we're going to focus on the suspects for this episode. But there is one final thing that I want to share. And I was watching the YouTube channel Grunge. It's a channel that I haven't watched in years. They do a lot of pop culture. But they did a video on serial killers. And they were talking about how some serial killers don't operate in ways where there's just this regular pattern of activity. By that, I mean going out every single night, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, looking for victims. And why is that? Why are there these odd, infrequent gaps in serial killer activity? One answer is they are planning crimes at odd numbers of dates, like February 22nd, March 24th, because the killer or the attacker wants to prove that he or she is in control. Most of the time, it's a he. We can just say he. Most of the time, it's a male. This person is just trying to do this because he wants to be in control of the activities. And you even have some people. Well, like actually, first we have Jeff and Melissa in the chat. Jeff and Melissa of ZodiacKillerBomb.com. Good morning to you too, Jeff. And Melissa says because they have a full-time job and a family. Great, Melissa, great. Except one exception. What about somebody like Ted Kaczynski, who had enormous gaps in his activities? You know, he lived by himself and he never had a partner ever. He would be a better example of somebody who's committing the crimes infrequently to prove that he's in control. Now, the Phantom Killer, we have no idea if he was married or he had a family or not. The Zodiac Killer, married or family, unsolved cases. Jack the Ripper, married family, unsolved cases. We are not sure. Of course, Melissa and Jeff have a suspect named Loring Dale Hill, whom you can hear about on their website, ZodiacKillerBomb.com, as well as the Facebook group, Zodiac Killer and Me. I also have a couple interviews with them here on this channel. And if you want to follow along with all of these true crime discussions, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. But that's just something I wanted to share. Oh, Melissa says, Ted had a job, I believe, a professor. Ah, yes, but he committed his crimes as well when he was in Montana, when he moved to Lincoln, Montana, and more or less became a recluse, getting the stipend from his parents, claiming that he's living off the land, but he's actually like doing things like poaching and so on. But as far as the Phantom Killer goes, we have Phantom Killer suspects. The prime suspect is an individual named Youell Swinny. And I'm going to talk about a Phantom Killer suspect whom I've never discussed before on the channel, and his name is Max Tackett. And Max Tackett is a member of law enforcement. And he is the one who begins to notice that there appears to be some type of correlation between car thefts and the Phantom Killer's activities. Car thefts and the Phantom Killer's activities. And Youell Swinny was a notorious car thief. And Youell Swinny was recently married to a woman named Peggy Swinny. And she's the first one who was accosted by the police. And they were old newlyweds. They really weren't married for a very long time. And ultimately, she lets them know that her husband was the Phantom Killer. She becomes one of the most incriminating sources for Youell Swinny. And Youell Swinny is tracked down. The police are chasing him. He actually ends up on a fire escape. And ultimately, some events happen, and he's arrested. And he says, I'm going to get the chair. And the officer says, normally you don't get the chair for stealing cars. And then Youell Swinny says, oh, you got a lot more on me than stealing cars. What was he referring to? Well, was Youell Swinny the Phantom Killer? Number one, his wife incriminated him. Number two, his wife is interrogated multiple times, 4 different times by 12 different police officers, and she provided some facts that apparently only the real killer should have known. One of these facts was the location of Betty Jo Booker's saxophone, the female victim from the third crime. How could she have known that? Saying that Betty Jo Booker's saxophone was thrown on the other side of a fence, thrown over the fence on the right side of the road. It took 6 months for them to find Betty Jo Booker's saxophone. And I said that there's that heel print in the odd place. Could that not have belonged to Peggy Swinny? I once appeared on the Citizen Detective podcast with their panel, and one of the panelists is named Cloyd Steiger. He's a former member of law enforcement, and he's the author of the books Homicide, The View from Inside the Yellow Tape, and Seattle's Unknown Serial Killer. And this is one where he really took a strong stance and said, I think Youell Swinny's a very strong suspect. And it was my job on that podcast episode to provide the counterbalance to that, just some alternatives. But I have to confess, I think Youell Swinny is a very strong suspect. It's quite possible that he was the Phantom Killer. And this comes down to the following reason. What if everything that his wife said was true? I never liked him in the past as a suspect, but I have to admit now, he is a strong suspect. Why would I have doubts about this? Number one, as I stated, Peggy Swinny and Youell Swinny were newlyweds. Relatively speaking, they hadn't been married that long. And he's a criminal. He was a real car thief. Is it possible that she had some type of buyer's remorse for marrying this guy who's a criminal and is putting her in these lousy situations? Maybe he pissed her off too much already and she didn't want that life. That's number one. And the thing that I say in almost every Phantom Killer episode is, citing the works of John Tennyson and Jeremy Kennington, that Peggy Swinny was interrogated 4 times by 12 different officers, and she was talking to her attorney. And during those interrogations and talking with her attorney, could she not have obtained that information that only the real killer could have known? So, I have some doubts, but I do think Youell Swinny is a very strong suspect. Another point of evidence is Youell Swinny was apparently in possession of a t-shirt, not a t-shirt, a shirt that said Starks, referring to the business owned by Virgil Starks. Here's something I have thought about over the years. Even if Youell Swinny didn't commit all of the Phantom Killer murders, could he not just be the prime suspect in the murder of Virgil Starks? The murder of Virgil Starks is so different than the other Phantom Killer murders. Different firearm. No sighting of the hooded costume. They're attacked indoors. So many differences. Could Virgil Starks just have committed that? Not Virgil Starks. Could Youell Swinny have just committed the murder of Virgil Starks? That's something that I think about. That's something that I've thought about a lot. All right. Now, moving on to another suspect that I've never talked about before on the channel, the saxophone peddler. In the Jack the Ripper case, we have an individual named Jacob Eisenschmied. He seems like he should be Jack the Ripper, except he was in the hospital at the time of one of the murders, so he more or less got exonerated. Couldn't have been him. Not only an airtight alibi, a certifiable alibi. And after the murders of Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin, there's this guy in Texas who's trying to sell a saxophone. And he has a gun on him. He's trying to sell a gun. And they find bloody clothes in his car. He claims that he has the bloody clothes because he got into a bar fight with somebody. You have a murdered saxophonist, and at the time the saxophone was missing. He's carrying the gun. He has bloody clothes. Doesn't that sound like a murderer? Well, as I said, though, Betty Jo Booker's saxophone was located 6 months later, so I don't even really think there's too much to say about the saxophone peddler. I don't even know his name, but I'm thinking he didn't do it. Now, there's another suspect out there named H.B. Tennyson, also known by his nickname Duty Tennyson. Duty Tennyson would go on to confess to the Phantom Killer murders, the Texarkana Moonlight murders, and he would commit suicide in 1948. He left behind a suicide note, which said something to the effect of, "I should have been spending time with people instead of staying in my room and dreaming." Duty Tennyson also left behind multiple confessions to the Phantom Killer murders. He even left behind a lockbox that had this type of encrypted mechanism, and he left behind a riddle for the police to use to solve the clues and to open the lockbox. But the police didn't want anything to do with that, so they just kind of smashed it open. And then there was this other note that said, even though he had confessed to the Phantom Killer murders, disregard all previous confessions. And for a long time, I really thought that Duty Tennyson was going to be the top suspect, even better than Youell Swinny. But number one, I had a reversal, and that was that this guy's just playing mind games, even after he's gone. Melissa has a question about, did Duty Tennyson leave behind physical evidence? And firstly, they'll say good morning to Don Spain in chat. You know, Melissa, I don't think so. I don't think that Duty Tennyson left behind any physical evidence. And even worse than that, he had an alibi for one of the murders. And I believe that it's a friend who reports that Duty Tennyson was with his brother at the time. Somebody comes forward and says that that's what happened. So somebody can vouch for his whereabouts, even though Duty Tennyson confessed. I've taken a full step back and just making the hard statement that I don't think that this guy was the Phantom Killer. And Susie Q is here. Hello, Susie Q. And you're in Northern California. Hello from the Philippines, but always coming to you from West Virginia at heart. And Charlie is here. Good morning, Charlie. How's it going? Now, as far as other suspects go, giving a shout out to Ghostwriter once again, the request was to talk about the Phantom Killer suspect Max Tackett. Max Tackett was a member of law enforcement. Max Tackett is the guy who came up with this idea to look for someone who could be stealing cars. And if Max Tackett were indeed the Phantom Killer, this would be a clear example of somebody hiding in plain sight. This would be a clear example of somebody not only being a cop and using that against other people, but this would be a clear example of somebody throwing in things to the mix like, what an interesting idea. It's almost as if the killer were thinking like this. It's almost as if I have a crystal ball in my psychopathic mind. He's the real killer and he's just dropping these taunts and teases. Now, there are a bazillion Zodiac killer suspects that get accused of this. Most famously, Gareth Sewell Penn. He is a researcher, the author of Time 17, who made certain discoveries about the Zodiac killer case involving radians, angles, numbers, Morse code, binary, area codes. And then he goes on to be a suspect. And we got to get Ray Grant in the chat for this one because Gareth Penn is one of Ray Grant's suspects. Ray Grant has 4 suspects in the Zodiac killer mystery. But that would be the exact same thing. Like somebody is almost just inserting the evidence into the case, telling you, this is how I did it. You just have to connect the dots. Now, I'm not saying Max Tackett is. It's possible. Another thing that I think is really interesting is that Max Tackett was born in 1912. And the Phantom Killer murders took place in 1946. So he would have been 35 years old. 34 years old. Excuse me. And he's in his early 30s, for a lack of a better term. And I think that this is really interesting because it's at the mid-30s, there can be a certain level of awareness that the killer might have that somebody who's much younger would not have. Duty Tennyson would have been only in his late teenage years at the time of the murders. And I just don't think that Duty Tennyson was the Phantom Killer based on everything that we set out. As Melissa's asking, no physical evidence. Confessions plus retracted confessions, mind games and riddles, and let alone that he had an alibi. I don't think it's the guy. So, as far as Max Tackett goes, just being in his mid-30s, going after people who would be considerably younger than him, and somebody who could perhaps outsmart and overpower younger people, or at the very least he's going out with the intention to outsmart and overpower younger people. That makes sense to me. Notice how there's this very large concentration of Zodiac killer suspects who are in their mid-30s, like ages 33, 34, 35, 36. Melissa and Jeff, if you're still in the chat, right? You know what I'm talking about? Because somebody who is frustrated with life, disgruntled, and just kind of wants revenge on society, all of that makes sense. Now, did he actually do it? It's hard to say, but there's a lot of evidence in the Phantom Killer case. If you even get on Google Images, you can see a palm print that allegedly belonged to the killer. Although the evidence log does state it's logged in 1947. The Phantom Killer crimes took place in 1946. So there definitely are some strong points for Max Tackett. But are there any other suspects out there? Well, there is the German POW, the German prisoner of war. And he is, again, an unnamed suspect, 1946. We are dealing with the post-World War II era. We are dealing with a lot of rough things going on between Americans and Germans. And I don't know much about this German POW, except apparently he was held in Texarkana and released, and he had a full head of bright red hair. And they think that in this theory, one explanation could be that he put on the hooded costume and he used the hooded sack mask because he thought, if any way somebody recognizes me, it will be so easy to tie it back to me. Well, this head of bright red hair, a prisoner who just got released, who had a big head of bright red hair. It sounds silly almost, right? No, not really. People do think like that. Casbah says, I'm sure the Phantom was 16 years old then and became the Zodiac at age 38. All right, finally we can get to the Zodiac Killer, Phantom Killer discussions. Now, the Phantom Killer is extremely similar to the Zodiac. Think about everything that I've said. Targeting couples parked in cars and lovers' lane settings, deviating from the pattern with the final crime, and targeting a much older man. Paul Stine was 29 years old. He was the oldest Zodiac killer victim. Virgil Starks was the oldest Phantom killer victim at age 37. And I should also point out, though, that the murder of Richard Griffin took place when Richard Griffin was 29, and Polly Ann Moore was 17 at the time, but, he was 29 years old. So I don't necessarily think that this person specifically wants to hurt young people. Let's say, hypothetically, if Virgil Starks was a victim of the same killer, I think that this is more about something that was shared by Dr. Anthony LaPalla, a forensic psychiatrist, who examined the case. And he said that this type of behavior is extremely common for a killer with a short reign of terror, short period of activity. He's going to commit 3 crimes in a similar way. The 4th crime will deviate from the pattern. Casbah says that he has a POI in the Phantom Killer mystery who had reddish blonde hair, Irish descent. You can't just leave us hanging there, Casbah. You got to put more in the chat than that. You have a Zodiac killer, Phantom killer suspect. Please do tell. All right, though. So all of that seems to kind of line up. The Zodiac killer, Jack the Ripper, committing the first 3 nights of activity in relatively similar ways. The 4th one is very different. Even Jack the Ripper deviated from attacking women outdoors to attacking women indoors. One thing that I've entertained, and I could be wrong about this, is it just probability? Is it just that, with a killer like Jack the Ripper, for example, is he just going to be going after women on the street? And just by chance, the 5th victim, the final victim, Mary Kelly, had her own room, and none of these other women had their own room to stay in. Mary Kelly had her own room for rent, so Jack the Ripper goes indoors with her. That's possible. With the Zodiac killer, no, not possible. The Zodiac killer was extremely calculated with his actions, to the best of our knowledge, on the night of the Stine murder. Getting into Paul Stine's taxi, at the very least, he murdered him. And, he, I don't know exactly if something triggered him and he killed Paul Stine on impulse, or it was all designed. Gareth Penn will tell you that it's all by design. I tend to think so as well, that was specifically chosen. But that's what Dr. Anthony LaPalla was clearly talking about, deviating on the 4th night of activity. Paranoid Android says, not sure this matters, but I always thought that the Zodiac was a raging homosexual. You wrote ragging homosexual, but I think you mean raging homosexual, right, Paranoid Android? Oh, I would love to know your thoughts and reasons about why you think the Zodiac was a homosexual. We do have homosexual suspects out there, such as Richard Gaikowski. Arthur Lee Allen was a bisexual, and William Joseph Grant, that's another homosexual one. And if anything you want to share in the chat, please do tell. Melissa says, the witnesses say 40 years old. Is there any evidence that he worked in the oil fields? Probably was not a local. Could be a traveling migrant worker due to the times and breaks between murders, then it dries up. Your guess is as good as mine. As far as the witness descriptions on the Phantom Killer case go, Melissa, it appears that the Phantom Killer was rather well fit, reasonably strong. That could fit into anything. Like Casbah has a 16-year-old suspect. Maybe. Although I think that this type of behavior is a little bit more advanced in the mind of a 16-year-old. But that's just me. Now, Jerome is back. Hey, Jerome, how's it going? Casbah does have something here when he says, in the Zodiac, when he sent a cipher, the My Name Is cipher, also known as the Z13, is Texarkana Phantom. Now, Casbah, you got to share the metric. You can't just throw this stuff at us. You got to clue us in on how it goes. Ray Grant says, the connection was in the Count Marco letter when he referred to the Phantom. Ah, yes, Ray Grant, I read your book. Red Phantom, Red with Rage. The Zodiac Killer will go on to write the Count Marco letter in 1974, when it says, put Marco back in the hellhole from whence he came. Something to that effect. And it's signed, Red Phantom, Red with Rage. And Ray, like I said, I read your book, so it means that if Ray Grant's name is Red Ray Grant, then that doesn't mean his name is Red Ray Grant. If he writes it that way, his name is Ray Grant. Red is an adjective referring to Ray. the same way Red Phantom is referring to Phantom, what that person is saying is that this is a direct reference to the Phantom Killer. And quite likely that could be, or the very least, that's what the person is trying to communicate with the Red Phantom. Red Phantom, red with rage. That means that their name is the Phantom. Okay, and Ray Grant says you had killings on weekends in the Mask, attacking couples in lovers' lanes. Very similar to the Zodiac. But overall, Ray, I would love to know some of your thoughts about what do you think about Gareth Penn writing the book Time 17, inserting himself into the mystery. Oh, I just froze. I'm looking fine on my end, but hope you can hear me, Ray, because what do you think about Gareth Penn inserting himself into the mystery, writing the book Time 17? You've called him the Zodiac Killer's publicist. Is there anything else you'd like to share about Gareth Penn's activities? What role do you think Gareth Penn had as far as being the Zodiac's publicist? Because as I understand, you have 4 people involved in your Zodiac Killer theory, but Gareth Penn was not the trigger man, right? He was the publicist. Michael O'Hare was the trigger man in Ray Grant's theory. Andrew WVA is here, and he says, Penn seems like a crackpot in my opinion. Ah, Andrew WVA, my brother from West Virginia. How's it going? Have you been following the crackpot files on ZodiacKillerFacts.com run by Michael Butterfield by chance? Ray Grant has been making a new series of videos responding to them. Melissa says, or F4 Phantom. F4 Phantom, that's the plane from the Naval Air Corps. Please clue me in, Melissa. I'm a little bit hazy on those details. Jerome says, Ned, here you don't freeze. Oh, here? Always hot in the Philippines, Jerome. Andrew says, yes, I've been watching Ray Grant's recent videos. Overall, though, it's an uphill battle to convince me that the Zodiac Killer and the Phantom Killer were the same person. Texarkana, San Francisco. We don't exactly have direct allusions in the Zodiac Killer's letters to the Texarkana Phantom. We don't necessarily have an elaborate persona like the Zodiac with his letters and ciphers and codes, and even with the Lake Berryessa hood versus some dude who cut 2 holes in a sack and put it on his head. The Phantom is very unsophisticated compared to that of the Zodiac. Gareth says, Gareth Penn is not here. You know, Ray Grant, Gareth Penn does not respond to me every time I've tried to, get in touch with him, because I know that you think about Gareth Penn in a particular way, Ray, but for me, I just kind of want Gareth Penn's input on some things, and I want to approach him first as the author of Time 17, right, which is definitely an influential book on everybody in this space. And Ray Grant says, Gareth was in Fort Sill, Oklahoma during the Bates murder. I think he was present at Lake Herman Road. Now, Ray, did you write in your book that Gareth Penn may have fired one of the shots at Lake Herman Road that did not shoot anyone, that Michael O'Hare and Gareth Penn both each fire a shot? Good luck getting in touch with Gareth. As I understand, he's retired, and that guy Joe from, let's just say from Australia, was calling him multiple times, accusing him of being the Zodiac Killer, and he just said, don't call me anymore. I guess he doesn't want the publicity. And Melissa says, yes, that was the one with the bomb that was ignited and caught fire on the USS Enterprise. So Melissa's talking about on January 14th, 1969, the USS Enterprise, an aircraft carrier off the coast of Hawaii, had a massive fire which saw the deaths of 28 servicemen. And she's saying it was the F4 Phantom that caught fire. What happened with that is that there was a vehicle that was parked too close to one of the fuel tanks of, I guess, the F4 Phantom, and that caused it to explode. Now, if that were a specific target by anybody paying reference to the Phantom Killer, that would be calculated to the nth degree. But that is a very, very catastrophic event. And, this took place during the Vietnam War era. And Melissa has talked a lot about the fire on the SS Enterprise, as well as the fire that took place previously on the USS Forrestal. Multiple books have been written about this. And one thing that I had been toying with was doing a very large episode of Black Box Online Radio about the stories of the Vietnam War. Some people might not think that, USS Enterprise counts as the Vietnam War because it was in the Pacific Ocean. But there was actually like a petition to get the fallen servicemen from the Enterprise put on the Vietnam War Memorial. I would include it in a presentation like that. Go through these novels that have been written about the Vietnam War, talking about some secret stories. And Paranoid Android says, just get Graysmith on the show for Christ's sake. Okay, Paranoid Android. I've contacted Robert Graysmith as well. Guess what? He's just like, silence. Graysmith has never responded to me about anything. And, I'm not necessarily going to go easy on him. And I don't even think Graysmith would be following Black Box Online Radio. To be honest, I think he's probably pretty far gone from the Zodiac space. Melissa says, I do think there was some connection to the Phantom murders. He either knew him or was influenced by him. Well, think about everything that Ray said. Think about everything that I said, Melissa. How could the Zodiac killer not be inspired by the Phantom killer? Hooded serial killer targeting couples parked in cars at lovers' lanes, as Ray points out, on weekends, more or less. The deviations from the third and fourth murders, or third and fourth nights of activity, committing the fifth murder of an older man in a different way. I don't see how the Zodiac killer could not have read at least one article in a newspaper or a magazine about this and just thought, oh my God, I have an idea. What's the alternative? Similar psychology, I think, is at best. Jeff Thornton says, Zodiac copycats many things. Yes, he certainly did. Ray Grant says, Gareth lives in Seattle. Oh, he gave up on Carmel by the Sea? I wonder why. I'm sure the entire Zodiac community would love an interview with Gareth, Ross, Ned, and everyone else. Yeah, sure, Ray. I mean, I'd have so many things to say to Gareth Penn, though, because Ray Grant knows this better than anyone. Gareth Penn is not only a researcher, but also a Zodiac killer suspect, and I don't know how I could talk to him without bringing that stuff up. As I understand, he doesn't like to talk about it, but it's not even Ray Grant's accusation so much as it is from Joe Fernandez, the guy in Australia, who accused him of Gareth and the whole leaving the numerical signature 184 in various ways around the country. I'd have to ask him about that because I've heard Gareth Penn's responses, and they're not very satisfactory. And, we got to talk to him about Ray Grant and the Zodiac Killer Conceptual Art Project. I have my own suspicions about why Gareth Penn did what he did and why he wrote Time 17 the way that he did. Okay, Casbah is finally here with a POI. My POI is named Bill Meck. Do we just get the first two letters? Bill was born in Texas, lost sister Mary, he lost his sister Mary when she was 10. He was 7 years old. The first victim was Mary. This is PTSD. Serial killer starting, many survived. And the first victim, as we said, was Mary Jean LeRae. I'll give you that one. The French Wrecking Crew says, are you all okay? I'm doing fine. How are you, Jerome? Casbah says, his grandparents lived in Cali, and he went there at age 17. So he commits the Phantom Killer murders at age 16, Casbah, then goes to California and begins reshaping the Zodiac persona 20 years later. Paranoid Android is here. Question for Ray and Ned. If there was one Zodiac suspect you could interview when still alive and you would want to know the facts, who would that one person be? Paranoid Android. I don't know if you're going to like my answer. Arthur Lee Allen. Because firstly, I know that Arthur Lee Allen has been interviewed a bunch of times. You seen that thing when he's like faces blacked out? At times, these accusations could be horribly depressing. You guys seen the one where he's sitting outside? I am not the damn Zodiac. Yeah, he's been interviewed. I could not turn that down if he were still alive. After that, it's really kind of hard to say. But, Paranoid Android, excuse me, I really wanted to talk to Ted Kaczynski when he was still alive, because we have to remember, Kaczynski is connected to multiple true crime cases. I would want to interview him about the Unabomber stuff, too. Bruce Davis is another one that I really wanted to talk to, and he is still alive. If I ever make it out to Nevada and go to Lovelock Prison, perhaps I could. Because, you see, Bruce Davis was a member of the Manson family, and I would just want direct answers about these Zodiac questions. He's given indirect answers those that aren't sufficient. And I think Bruce Davis might pass away soon, actually. Well, he's been in jail for 50 some odd years. Melissa says, our suspect did live in Texas before the Bay. His wife's family was from Oklahoma and moved to Texas. Must have been dinner table talk for sure. And she agrees with Jeff on the Zodiac killer copycatting. Now, Melissa and Jeff, did you ever find out about the murder that occurred in 1957 that was linked to your Zodiac killer suspect? Any more info on that? The French Wrecking Crew says, for a debate? Jerome, would I debate Gareth Penn or something like that? I just want to talk to him. I don't want to debate. I do want to ask the tough, pressing questions, because at a certain point, you have to realize that this guy has been accused of being a murderer or being the publicist for murderers, plural. Let's just get the answers. None of this egocentric, dodge the questions. If you didn't do it, Gareth, let's hear it. If you have something to say about Time 17, let's hear it. If Gareth manipulated the narrative in any single way, and I only have like 700 or 800 questions about that, if he manipulated the Time 17 narrative in a specific way, maybe I have a couple questions. Okay. And we have Morgoth is here. He said, he did a few interviews and still plenty of good questions. He never got asked, though. Oh, certainly. Gareth Penn did some interviews. Like, Ray Grant just played a clip from one, and I think that was from his appearance on the TLC show. Ray Grant says, don't forget the Edward and Baird story from 1921, Sign Z, where the killer says on the phone, this is Z speaking. Yeah. I mean, I really do think that's an influence on the Zodiac killer too, Ray. You got, this is Z speaking. Charlie Chan at Treasure Island with the letters from Zodiac, Dr. Zodiac. But first he's called Zodiac in the film, mind you. Later on, he's revealed as Dr. Zodiac. Shock corridor that has the hooded costume with the circle and the cross on it. So many things. Melissa says 1957 is still unconfirmed. However, we now have another account that there could have been 2 murders in the 50s of men trying to help his wife leave. Well, you got to keep us updated on that. Ray Grant says that the show that he played, the clip of Gareth Penn, was called Case Reopened, where Gareth Penn is talking about the Zodiac may have been plotting places on a map based on the connections to bodies of water, and he was using certain angles on the map to tie them together. Now, Cat Daddy Steve says Z for Zorro. Somebody brought this to my attention once, Cat Daddy Steve. The famous character Zorro, the sword fighter wearing the black hat and mask, he would sign, like his initial Z on like rocks usually. When I would watch the Zorro cartoon growing up, he would just kind of draw it on a rock with his sword. Yeah, I went back and watched some of the old Zorro episodes, the live action ones that would have been present at the time of the Zodiac killer. I didn't really see too many things that were inspirations from Zorro in the Zodiac world, other than, the masked vigilante. I mean, the Zodiac's not a vigilante, masked figure who's going against the law, doing what he wants. To be clear, the Zodiac's not a vigilante. He is just a self-serving twerp. Ray says, Ned, have you read the Baird short story? Yes, Ray, you actually sent that to me once in 2022. Yes, I have read it. And as the serial killer says, this is Z speaking, this is Z calling. And it's the story where there's this fictional serial killer that's targeting the presidents of banks or high-ranking officials in banks. And they are very specific targets. And there's this weird angle where it gets tied into apples of all things, maybe foreshadowing computers in the future. But yeah, Sign Z definitely does seem like it has Zodiac killer influences. And it was originally published in Detective Story magazine in 1921. Jeff says Navy connections. There's a 2-part comment. Treasure Island is a connection to our suspect, Charlie Chan at Treasure Island. And Jeff says Navy connections. Yeah, I was actually just listening to the Snake River Killer podcast, and that one did a two-part episode on the Zodiac Killer. It's called the Snake River Killer because they're exploring a different serial killer mystery, but they did two episodes on how their serial killer suspect, whose name is Lance Voss, could be a Zodiac killer suspect. Right. And they even said that it's a certifiable fact that the Zodiac killer was in the Navy. And I'm going to share some of this on a future Zodiac Monday. But I want to be like, not certifiable, but highly likely. Oh, Morgoth says The Mask of Zorro is a good movie. That's the one with Antonio Banderas, right, and Catherine Zeta-Jones. You know, Morgoth, I don't think I've seen that one. I watched the cartoon growing up, and that was when we would go to the video store and I would rent the Zorro cartoon on VHS. It was amazing because Zorro has a cool costume. Homer Simpson would agree. And then, as I said, I watched some of the live-action show. I saw a little bit of the movie Zorro the Gay Blade from the 1980s, which, why? Why did they have to make that film? And Paranoid Android said, any Zodiac connections to the Charlie Chan series? Do you mean outside of Treasure Island, Paranoid? And Ray Grant says, Case Reopened also has Michael Butterfield at 38 minutes. It's available at Case Reopened Zodiac. He calls up the newspaper and says, this is Z speaking. Now, Ray Grant, has Michael Butterfield responded at all to the recent episodes that you've done about the Crackpot Files? Just curious. Jeff Thornton says, this is the Zodiac speaking comes from, this is the captain speaking, all Navy. And the French Wrecking Crew says, Edouard V sent me a video comparison with Batman and Zodiac. Really well done. I'm going to share with you for the next Monday show. Okay, Jerome, now is this going to be the old school Batman or the new Batman with the Riddler? I mean, the Riddler in the Batman with Robert Pattinson is directly based on the Zodiac killer's yeah, it's based on the Zodiac Killer, although he's wearing a green costume, but you still have the Creepazoid wearing glasses, mailing in things that are identical to the Halloween card. And Charlie became a member and says, welcome to the future, Black Box Online Radio bonus features. Oh, there are going to be so many things I'm going to share with you for a new upcoming membership, Charlie. And Charlie says, I've only seen black and white Zorro movies. I got to watch some of those. Ray Grant says, Butterfield is about as available as Gareth. Maybe you can set up a debate between us. I would love to do that. Gladly, Ray, on Black Box Online Radio or the debate files. I mean, I'll even get my popcorn ready if Ross wants to host that, but I'll try my best. Ray, I think Michael Butterfield will be more receptive than Gareth Penn, and I mean, I've at least talked to Michael Butterfield once, and he knows who I am. Gareth Penn gives me nothing but crickets. And Melissa says we can prove that he was a pilot by his choice of Mount Diablo with wing walker boots, airmail caps on the LA Times letter, and captain speaking copycat. By the way, Melissa, as I understand, you were working on a Zodiac Killer book. Any updates? And, oh yes, Ray Grant says a debate with Gareth Penn might bring up a few views. Well, Ray, Gareth might take a lot of things to the grave with him. I know you have questions, Ray, even though, like, you more or less think you understand what Gareth was all about, and you followed the story way longer. I have questions about why Gareth was doing the things that he did. Michael O'Hare probably has questions about why Gareth Penn was doing things the way he did, no matter what angle you look at it. And I think Gareth is going to take that stuff to the grave. Melissa says she is indeed working on a Zodiac Killer book. And thank you so much to everybody for listening to this episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. And you can always put any final questions that you have here about the Zodiac Killer or the Phantom Killer. And to anyone listening back in the replay, I do these segments Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And started out talking a lot about the Phantom Killer and then got into a lot of the Zodiac Killer stuff here. But we have a final comment and question from Paranoid, who says, Ned, did you hear the breaking news that in the Diddy freak-off parties, he would wear a mask with a Zodiac symbol and have sex with baby oil? Paranoid Android, no, I did not. No, I did not hear the news about Diddy having sex with a Zodiac mask and baby oil. Am I better off knowing that? No. But Zodiac mask? Must be the Illuminati. Kanye is going to beat the crap out of him later on. Yokoso says, has anyone seen the Zodiac was a myth TV show? It had low ratings. Yeah, I have. And someone asked, is Michael O'Hare retired? I don't think so. Right, Ray? I think he's still working. Mike Frazzi says, I don't think the Zodiac is the Phantom Killer. They seem to be the same type of killer, though. Yes. The Zodiac was a more elaborate Phantom Killer. It's almost like the Phantom Killer has some prototype material that the Zodiac expanded upon. That's what I think, Mike. And Cat Daddy Steve says, yes, hit the thumbs up. You can hit the thumbs up if you want. You can always hit the like button, subscribe, become a member. Mostly I'm going to work with a membership next year for Black Box Online Radio. And just, I have a lot of things that I'm going to be sharing with you guys. But in addition to True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, every Monday I do a segment about the Zodiac Killer. Every Wednesday I do one about Jack the Ripper. And every Friday one about D.B. Cooper. Lots of content here on Black Box Online Radio to follow. And, by the way, this weekend, there will be the first episode in the next story in the White Horse Killer saga called The Eyes of the White Horse. This will be released as a YouTube-exclusive audiobook, and I invite you to check it out. Hey, guys, thank you so much for listening to this live stream. That will be all for me now. You can get me on Facebook under my name, Ned DeHaan. You can get me BlackboxNed88 on Instagram and TikTok. And for larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. That'll be all for me now. Until next time.